The sky above Berlin looked almost beautiful the day I thought I would die. It was February 1945. The air was bright and thin, and the sun caught the tops of the clouds so they glowed like broken pieces of glass. Under us, far, far below, that city was burning. Above us, the black puffs of flak were opening like poisonous flowers. "Flak at 2 o'clock, Frank shouted in my earphones. I already saw it. You could feel it before you saw it, really. The way the air seemed to tighten around the plane, like the sky itself was about to punch you. The B-17 shook as if some giant hand had grabbed our tail and was trying to rip us out of the air. This is it, I thought. This might be the one. Hold her level, Danny. That was Mark, our bombardier, his voice high and sharp over the interphone. We're almost at the drop point. Almost. Almost could mean 10 seconds. It could also mean forever. I wrapped both hands tighter around the control wheel. My gloves were slick with sweat. The instrument panel in front of me flickered and danced with vibration. Altimeter, airspeed, engine gauges, little green and yellow needles shivering as if they were afraid too. "Sky Lantern to Group Leader," I said into my microphone. My ship's name was painted under my cockpit window, Sky Lantern, in white letters that were now streaked with oil and soot. "We are taking heavy flak. Repeat, heavy flak." A calm voice crackled back in my headset, the voice of the lead ship's pilot. "Copy, Sky Lantern. Stay in formation. Bombs away in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Below my feet, the cold metal of the rudder pedals shook under my boots. Above my head, the plexiglass canopy was dotted with tiny white scratches, scars from other days like this. Days when pieces of steel, invisible and screaming, had come up from the ground to tear holes in the sky. "Tail to pilot," Joe's voice snapped in my headphones. Joe Ramirez, my tail gunner, always with a joke when we needed it, but not now. Now his voice was thin and tight. "They're walking it right up to us. I can see the bursts getting closer." "Just hang on," I said. My own voice sounded strange in my ears, too calm. "Everybody stay sharp. Mark, you tell me the second you're on target. Walt, keep an eye on those radio calls. Frank." "I got you," Frank said from the right-hand seat. He was my co-pilot, bigger than me, stronger than me, and right now he was leaning into the controls with his whole body to keep the wings level as the air beat us around like a toy. Another flak burst went off almost exactly in front of us. For a half-second, my whole world was just white light and the thick, heavy thump of shock through the airframe. The plane jumped. Something banged loud and hard behind us. "Jesus," someone yelled. I didn't know who. Warning lights flashed red on the panel. One engine gauge suddenly dropped. Number 3. "Number 3's hit," Frank shouted. "Oil pressure dropping." "Feather it," I shouted back. My voice came out steady because it had to. "Feather number 3. He reached up, fingers fast and sure, and pulled the prop control. Somewhere out on the wing, a propeller blade twisted out of the airflow and began to windmill slower and slower. One of our 4 engines was gone. "Pilot to crew," I said. "We've lost number 3, but we are still in the air. We stay in tight. We drop our bombs. We go home. Eyes open, heads down, nobody panics. You hear me?" "I hear you," came Mark's voice. "Got it," Walt said from the radio compartment. "Copy," from our engineer and top turret gunner, Tom. "Still here," Joe said softly from the tail. "Sky Lantern still got her stinger." I looked out past the left wingtip and saw the other bombers in our box. 3 up, 3 down, 3 beside us, like gray, wounded birds. Some already had holes punched through their wings. One had thin white smoke trailing from his number 2 engine. Another had a ragged gap where his tail gunner's position should have been. We were all still flying. For how long, no one knew. The bombs were still in our bay. The target below us was almost under our nose. "This is how I die," I thought, and some small, stubborn voice in the back of my mind answered, "Not yet." I didn't know then that this mission would change everything. That a few minutes up in that thin, cold air would burn themselves into my memory so deep that, 30 years later, sitting on my porch back in Iowa, I'd still wake up some nights with the taste of burned oil in my mouth and the sound of flak in my ears. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you want to understand that day, the fear, the noise, the way my hands still shook when I lit a cigarette afterward, you have to understand how we got there. You have to know who we were before the sky over Berlin turned black around us. So let me start somewhere quieter. Let me start with a radio in a small kitchen, and the sound of my father putting down his coffee cup very, very carefully. I grew up in a town in Iowa that most people never heard of, and that was fine with us. In the summer, the cornfields ran right up to the backyards, and the nights smelled like cut grass and warm dirt. The loudest thing you heard after dark was crickets and the low hum of the grain elevator far off by the tracks. On the day that changed my life, I was sitting at the kitchen table, tying a fishing line. The radio was on the counter next to an old flour tin. It was a big wooden thing with glowing orange numbers, and it always seemed a little too loud for the room. My kid sister Ruth sat on the floor by the window, drawing. My father, Henry Miller, stood by the sink with a cup of coffee. My mother was stirring a pot of soup on the stove. It was Sunday. The world felt slow and safe. Then the music on the radio stopped. "We interrupt this program," the announcer said. My fingers paused in the fishing line knot. "We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air." For a moment, the words didn't land. Hawaii was a place in magazines, palm trees and hula skirts and blue water. "This is no drill. I repeat, this is no drill." My mother's spoon stopped moving. A little bit of soup dripped back into the pot with a soft pat. "What does that mean?" Ruth asked. She was 13. Her braids reached the middle of her back, and she had ink smudges on her fingers from drawing. My father didn't answer right away. His eyes had gone strange, narrow, and far away, as if he was looking at something past the wall. Men like my father didn't talk much about their thoughts, but I knew he'd been to another war. France, 1918. There was a faded photograph in a drawer somewhere of him in a doughboy helmet, squinting at the camera. That was all he ever showed. Now, as the radio voice kept talking, words like battleships and casualties and President Roosevelt will address the nation. My father put his coffee cup down on the counter with slow, careful hands. "It means," he said finally, "that this is going to be a long road." I was 19. At 19, you think you're unbreakable. You think death is something that happens to old people far away or to names in newspapers. You think war is a story in books. But that night, sitting close to the radio while Roosevelt's voice came through, slow and clear and full of a kind of terrible calm, something inside me shifted. "A date which will live in infamy," he said. I looked at my father. "What are we going to do?" I asked. He looked back at me for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall. "That's the wrong question, Danny," he said quietly. "The question is, what are you going to do?" I enlisted a week later. I remember walking into the recruiting office, the smell of dust and paper, the posters on the walls. One stood out, a pilot in a leather jacket and goggles looking off into a sky full of bombers. Above him, in big letters, "Join the Army Air Forces, keep M flying." I didn't know much about planes. I'd seen them sometimes, little specks high up leaving thin white lines across the blue. Once a barnstormer had come through town when I was a kid, and for 50 cents you could sit in the back of his little biplane and see the earth from far above. We didn't have 50 cents. But now the sky called to me in a way I couldn't explain. The idea of being up there above the clouds, doing something that mattered, it dug into my chest and wouldn't let go. "You sure about this?" my father asked the night before I left for basic. He sat at the kitchen table, a cigarette burning down between his fingers.
My mother was pretending to read a magazine. Ruth had gone to her room early. I'd seen the red around her eyes. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "I'm sure." He looked at me, really looked. I saw lines on his face I hadn't noticed before. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "You'll be afraid, and anyone who tells you he isn't afraid up there is either a liar or a fool." I swallowed. "Were you afraid in France?" He looked down at his cigarette. A bit of ash fell onto the table. "Every day," he said softly. But I had men next to me depending on me to do my job anyway. That's the difference between fear and cowardice, Danny. Fear is what you feel. Cowardice is what you choose. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object. A silver dollar, its edges smooth with years of rubbing. He slid it across the table to me. Carried that in my pocket the whole time I was over there, he said. Never did a thing for me except remind me to keep moving. Maybe it can remind you too. I picked it up. It felt cool and heavy in my palm. I don't expect you to be a hero, he said. Heroes are for newspapers. I just expect you to look out for the man next to you and come home if you can. You understand? I nodded. I thought I did. Ruth came in then, eyes red. She walked right past me to my father, put her arms around his shoulders and buried her face against him. He reached up and patted her arm awkwardly. You come back, she said to me without looking up. Her voice was muffled. You hear me, Danny, you come back. I wanted to promise. I opened my mouth to say I will, but the words stuck in my throat. I'll try, I said instead. Later, lying awake in my bed, I turned the silver dollar over and over in my hand and listened to the wind in the cornfields outside. Wet, basic training burned the softness off me. The first weeks were all mud and shouting. We ran in formation until my legs shook, did push-ups in the cold gravel until my arms were jelly. I learned how to strip a rifle blindfolded, how to march in step, how to obey. But it was when they sent me to flight school that I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. The first time I sat in the left seat of a trainer with an instructor beside me, the smell of gasoline and oil and old leather around us. Something inside me thrilled and trembled at the same time. Hands on the yoke, the instructor said. He was a lean man with a quiet voice and sun-creased eyes. Feet on the rudders, don't fight the airplane, feel it. It'll tell you what it wants to do. The engine roared, the small plane bumped down the runway. The world outside shook and blurred. And then almost gently, the ground let go. I remember the exact second the wheels lost contact with Earth. My stomach dipped and my heart jumped. My hands tightened, then loosened as the instructor said, Easy, son, just like that, look out at the horizon. The town, the fields, the roads, they all fell away. The land became a patchwork quilt. The horizon was a straight, hard line. The sky was enormous. Up there, you realize how small you are, but you also realize how much space you have to move. By night, I studied flight manuals until the words blurred. Lift and drag, angle of attack, stall speed. By day, I learned to land without killing myself. I learned to trust instruments when my body lied. I learned that the air could be kind 1 hour and murderous the next. Guys washed out. Some just couldn't judge a landing. Some got sick every time the plane banked. Some froze when the instructor cut the engine and said, Okay, now what? I was not the best. I was not the worst. But I wanted it more than anything I'd ever wanted. When they pinned pilot's wings on my chest, my hands shook so much the captain had to straighten them. Second Lieutenant Daniel Miller, he read, qualified pilot for engine. For engine, that meant bombers. Not the sleek little fighters that everyone dreamed about. Not the lone wolves who chased the enemy through the clouds. No, it meant the big ships, the flying fortresses that carried death in their bellies and needed 10 men to keep them alive. When I got to the airfield in Texas, where they introduced us to the B-17, she was sitting on the tarmac like a building made of aluminum. She is what we always said, planes were never it. Listen up, our instructor, a captain named Harris, said. This is what you'll be flying, B-17 Flying Fortress. 4 Wright Cyclone engines, 10 can carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs. I walked closer, my neck craned back. The wings seemed to go on forever. The nose glass glinted in the sun like a jewel. The fuselage was thick and round, strong. The whole thing smelled of metal, oil, and possibility. You keep this bird flying, Hera said, and she'll bring you home. We learned every part of her. We crawled through the narrow tunnel from the cockpit to the radio room, slid down into the bomb bay, and tried not to think about what those long, smooth cylinders would do when they hit the ground. We sat in the nose and looked out over the world, fragile and far below. And we met each other. They assigned us to permanent crews. A bomber is not one man, it's 10 hearts beating in one tin can. My co-pilot was Frank O'Donnell, a big Irish kid from Boston with a broken nose and a laugh that filled the room. He played football in high school and could lift a crate of ammo like it was a pillow. But the first time we went up in bad weather, I saw his fingers twitch on the controls, and I knew fear was close for him. My navigator was Mark Stevens from Ohio, thin and serious with wire-rimmed glasses that were always sliding down his nose. He was the one with the maps, the charts, the slide rule. He could look at the stars and tell you where you were within a mile. When he first stepped into the nose and saw all that gas, he muttered, "If my mother could see this, she'd faint." Our bombardier was Walt Harris, not related to Captain Harris, though he joked about it. Walt was from Brooklyn and talked faster than anyone I'd ever met. He played cards constantly and owed half the base money within a week. But when he crawled into the nose and took hold of the northern bomb site, his whole face changed. Suddenly he was quiet, careful, like a man handling holy things. Tom Grady, our engineer and top turret gunner, was from Montana, with hands like shovels and eyes that missed nothing. He knew engines like some men know their children. He could listen to the hum of our 4 Cyclones and tell if one had a cough. In the waist we had 2 gunners, Pete Nolan, tall and lanky from Kansas, cheeks always red from the cold, and Shorty Lewis, 5'6" and furious about it, from Philadelphia. Shorty could curse in ways I'd never heard. Up front, behind our seats, the radio operator was a quiet kid from Minnesota named Eli Rosen. He kept a little prayer book tucked into his flight jacket and touched it before every takeoff. He wrote letters home to his parents in careful, small handwriting. And in the tail, out there by himself in the loneliest seat in the sky, sat Joe Ramirez. Joe was from San Antonio, second-generation Mexican-American. His English had a soft edge to it, like it had been worn smooth by another language at home. He had a photo of his mother and 2 little sisters taped up by his guns. He called everyone amigo, even the guys who weren't sure if they liked him at first because of his last name. The first night we all sat together in the barracks in Texas, eating bad stew, Frank raised his tin cup. To Sky Lantern, he said. We had only just chosen the name that afternoon, sitting around the nose art sketches. Joe suggested it. Lantern, he'd said, like something that lights up the dark. They'd all looked at me, the pilot, the one who got to say yes or no. I like it, I said. So now Frank raised his cup. To Sky Lantern, may she keep us in one piece. We all clinked our cups together. Some of us were laughing. Some of us were thinking about home. None of us knew not really what was coming. What? On a cold, gray morning, we flew out of the United States and watched the shoreline fall away behind us. The flight across the Atlantic took hours. The ocean below was a flat, endless sheet of gray steel. We flew low enough that I could see white caps. The engines droned, steady and hypnotic. Somewhere in the middle, with nothing but cold water beneath us in all directions, I realized just how far from home we were going. "You all right, Danny?" Frank asked quietly. I glanced at him. His big hands rested loosely on his half of the controls. His jaw muscle teaked. "Yeah," I said, "you." He snorted. "Ask me again when we land." Land we did, finally, in England. I will always remember the smell when I stepped out of the plane. It was damp, first of all, a hard, wet cold that went through your jacket and into your bones. The air smelled of coal, smoke, and mud, of wet grass and oil. The sky was low and the color of dirty wool. "Welcome to the war," Tom muttered. Our base was a cluster of Nissen huts and long, low buildings laid out around the runways like someone had thrown a bunch of tin cans into a field. Trucks rumbled by on muddy roads. Men in uniforms walked fast with their collars turned up. Somewhere a jeep backfired. Somewhere else, someone laughed too loud and then stopped suddenly. We were at a place whose name we weren't supposed to say in letters home. We just called it somewhere in England. They sent us to a briefing hut where a big map of Europe covered one wall. Little colored strings and pins crossed from our dot in England to dots deep inside the continent. A colonel pointed with a stick. "Right now the Germans own most of this," he said. We're going to change that. We learned about flak zones and fighter escort and target priorities. We saw photos, black and white, of factories and rail yards and oil refineries. We saw other photos too, the kind they didn't put on posters, twisted wreckage of planes like hours in fields, dark smudges on snow that you didn't look at too long. They can't beat you if you stick together, the colonel said. Remember that, the formation is your armor, you break off, you die. That night we lay in our new bunks. The barracks walls were thin, the wind pushed at them and made them creak. I could hear someone snoring 2 beds down, hear the scrape of a match as someone lit a cigarette in the dark. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. Hey Danny, Joe's voice came from the bunk above me. Yeah. You think we'll be scared? I looked up at the bottom of his mattress, as if I could see him through it. I think we'd be stupid not to be, I said. There was a pause. Okay, he said softly, as long as it's not just me. But our first mission came sooner than any of us expected. We were woken at 3 a.m. by a corporal with a clipboard and a flashlight. His face was pale and abeam. Briefing at 0400, he said. Miller crew, you're on the list. On the list, Frank muttered, pulling his boots on. That sounds promising. In the mess hall, men sat hunched over tin trays, steam rising from their coffee. The talk was low and forced. Every now and then laughter broke out, sharp and a little too loud, then died quickly. In the briefing hut, the map was covered by a curtain. When everyone was seated, the operations officer stepped up, grabbed the edge of the curtain and pulled it back. A red piece of string stretched from our base to a dot deep in France. This is your target, he said. Rail yards in Rouen, you cut these lines, you cut their supply to the front. He talked about altitudes and headings and expected resistance. I watched the string on the map and tried not to think about the little cardboard coffins waiting beside the runway for those who didn't come back. I'd seen them on the walk over. No one mentioned them. When the briefing was over, we filed out into the pre-dawn dark. The planes sat waiting like giant metal animals. Ground crew moved around them, checking tires, loading bombs, tightening bolts with quick practiced movements. As we walked towards Sky Lantern, a jeep pulled up and a woman climbed out. I noticed her first because there were so few women on base, then because of the way she walked, fast, sore, carrying a clipboard like it weighed nothing. She wore an army nurse's uniform under a heavy coat. A scarf covered her hair, but a few strands of brown escaped around her face. Lieutenant Miller, she called. I stopped, that's me. She came closer. Her eyes were tired but sharp. I'm Lieutenant Ellen Parker, she said. Base hospital. She nodded toward my crew who were loading their gear. You're the new boys. Yes, ma'am, I said. She glanced up at Sky Lantern, her eyes tracing the wings, the big round nose, the tail. Make sure you bring them back to me in one piece, okay? She said. I tried to make a joke. I'll do my best, but they're not very good listeners. The corner of her mouth twitched. None of you are, she said. Look, I'm supposed to tell you if anyone gets frostbite, do not rub their skin. That makes it worse. You wrap it. Warm water slowly. Same for hypothermia. And if anyone gets hit, her face changed for a moment, some shadow passing over it. If anyone gets hit, just get them back as fast as you can. I nodded. Suddenly the mission, the map, the lines of red string all collapsed into something very small and very real. The possibility of one of these men bleeding in my plane, while this woman with the tired eyes waited on the runway. Yes, ma'am, I said again more quietly. Good luck, Lieutenant, she said. Then she turned and walked back toward the jeep. Joe watched her go. Nice, he said, pretty and terrifying. Shut up, Joe, Frank said, but he was watching her too. We climbed into Sky Lantern. In the cockpit, everything was cold metal and green paint. The engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life one by one. The whole airframe vibrated. Pilot to crew, I said into the interphone. Sound off. In turn, their voices came. Co-pilot ready. Navigator ready. Bombardier ready. Radio ready. Engineer ready. We waist gunners are freezing but ready, Shorty said. Tail ready, Joe finished, and scared as hell but ready. I took a breath and pushed the throttles forward. We rolled down the runway, faster, faster, tail lifting, nose shaking. Then the world dipped away and we were in the air. The sun was just starting to bleed into the eastern sky. Below us, the fields of England were patchwork shadows. Above us, other bombers joined the climb, their wings catching the new light. A formation. We slid into our place, to the right and slightly back of the lead ship. Around us, other B-17s settled into their slots until the sky was full of them, a flock of steel. At altitude, the cold pressed in. My breath frosted on the inside of my mask. I flexed my gloved fingers on the controls. I can see the channel, Mark said from the nose. Looks like a sheet of tin. We crossed the water. Somewhere far below, gray waves beat against gray rocks. Keep your eyes peeled, Tom said. This is where they like to say hello. He meant the German fighters. We'd seen them in training films, sleek, fast, with black crosses on their wings. We'd seen gun camera footage of them exploding under American fire. We'd also seen pictures of B-17s with whole chunks beaten out of them. There's a special kind of fear that comes when you look into empty sky. And no, absolutely no, that somewhere in that blue someone is hunting you. 10 o'clock high, Pete suddenly shouted. Bandits, I got bandits. I snapped my head left, squinting into the bright. At first they were just little black flecks moving too fast to be birds. Then they grew, took shape, wings, noses, shining canopies. Messerschmitt's, Tom said, his voice was very calm. Here we go, boys. They came in small groups, then in swarms, diving out of the sun, guns flashing. Tracers drew red and green lines through the air. I heard the crack of bullets passing by, a strange flat sound even through the engine's roar. Our own guns answered. The B-17 was full of teeth, and now they all bit at once. The top turret rattled as Tom fired in short, controlled bursts. The side guns chattered under Pete and Shorty. Somewhere far behind me, Joe's twin .50s hammered from the tail. Got one, I got one, Shorty yelled, almost overcome by his own voice. He's smoking, he's going down. Stay cool, I said, don't get cocky. A line of holes appeared suddenly in the wing of the ship ahead of us, round and neat, like someone had punched through with a giant nail. Smoke trailed from its engine. It held formation for a moment, then began to sink slowly like a tired bird. Number 3 from lead is dropping out, Mark said quietly. We watched as it fell away below us. Tiny black dots tumbled out of it, parachutes. Shoots, Joe said. I count 5, no 6, 1, 2, 3. His voice slowed. 7, he whispered. Come on, come on. No more dots appeared. We flew on. When the fighters finally broke away, when the sky cleared around us except for our own formation, the only sound in my headset was breathing. Everybody okay? I said, my throat dry. One by one they answered, alive, no hits, no blood. Then ahead the dark line of land rose again, France. A few minutes later, the first puffs of flak appeared in the air before us. Eyes open, I said, here comes the other welcoming committee. The black bursts were ugly and sudden. 1 second only air, the next, boom, an explosion, a ball of smoke hanging impossibly still for a heartbeat, then fading, leaving only a feeling in your gut and a ringing in your ears. We'd seen it in films. It was different when the bursts were at your altitude. On the run, Mark said, bending over his charts. Steady heading, Danny, bomb bay doors coming open. I reached down and hit the switch. Below us, the doors in the belly opened with a low metallic groan. Cold air rushed up, filling the fuselage with a new, sharper chill. Bomb bay opened, Walt confirmed from his position. Now we had to fly straight and level. No weaving, no dodging. We were like a man walking slowly across a field while someone took careful aim. Bombs away in 10-9. Mark's voice counted in my ears, too loud, too precise. A burst of flak went off so close on our left that the whole plane lurched sideways. My head slammed against the side window. I tasted blood. The 605. Another burst to the right, closer. Shrapnel snapped past us, little invisible bullets of steel. Something clanged hard against the fuselage. Tom cursed. 3, 2, 1 bombs away. The ship jumped, suddenly lightened, as the load fell from her belly. Close them, I shouted. Doors closing, Walt said. Left turn 20 degrees, Mart said. Let's get the hell out of here. We turned. The flak followed for a while, then fell behind. The dark puffs grew smaller in the distance. Only then did I realize how hard I was gripping the wheel. I forced my fingers to loosen, one at a time. We made it back that day. Not everyone did. On the way home, across the Gray Channel, we flew through empty places where a plane should have been. You could feel the absence, like a missing tooth your tongue couldn't stop going back to. When we landed, my legs felt like rubber. We rolled to a stop. I switched off the engines. The roar died, leaving a strange, echoing silence in the cockpit. I sat there, hands still on the controls, staring at nothing. Danny, Frank said quietly, "You all right?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. We climbed down onto the concrete. Ground crews swarmed the plane, checking for damage. There were new holes in her skin, little ragged mouths that hadn't been there before. One right by the waist gun position, another near the tail. "Close one," Tom said, touching the edge of one hole with his thick fingers. Joe stood a few feet away, looking at his hands. They were still trembling. "First one's always the worst," a voice said behind us. I turned. It was Ellen, the nurse. She had a clipboard in her hands. Her eyes swept over us, counting heads. "How many you bring back?" she asked. "All 10, I said. She nodded once. "Good." Then her eyes fell to my forehead. "You're bleeding." I reached up, surprised. My fingers came away red from a shallow cut where I'd hit the window. "It's nothing," I said. "Come by the infirmary anyway," she said. "We're trying to get these planes back to the States with as many original parts as possible." She was making a joke, I realized. Her voice was dry, but there was a gentle edge. "Sure," I said, "if you promise not to tell my mother." Her mouth did that almost smile again. We stood there a second, looking at each other. Around us, other crews were climbing down from their planes, some with all their men, some not. A jeep pulled up to one of the bombers a few slots down. Medics jumped out. They rolled a stretcher toward the plane. For a moment I could see a shape on the stretcher covered in a blanket. An arm dangled loose. The hand was very, very still. Ellen's head turned. Her body seemed to tense. "I have to go," she said. Then she ran toward the jeep. That night I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the holes appearing in the other plane's wing. The way it had sunk away below us. The way those dark puffs had stepped closer, closer, like someone walking toward you across a field with a shotgun. I lay in the dark barracks, listening to the wind, the snores, the restless sighs. I pulled my father's silver dollar from under my pillow and turned it over in my fingers. "Fear is what you feel," he had said. "Cowardice is what you choose." I was afraid, no question about that. But when the corporal came with the clipboard 2 days later and said, "Miller crew, you're flying again," I got up anyway. And then again. And again. The missions blurred together sometimes. Rail yards, oil plants, factories turning out weapons that would be pointed back at us. Each time the briefing, the early dawn, the takeoff, the climb, the formation, the channel, the fighters, the flak. We got holes in the wings, in the tail, once through the nose that took out Walt's favorite deck of cards. He held up the ruined Queen of Hearts and said, "Guess love, not in the cards for me." But we kept bringing all 10 of us home. Mostly. One day, flying back from a target near Hamburg, a piece of flak came up through the floor beside Pete's waist gun and tore into his leg. His scream cut through the interphone. "High shot." Pete's hit, Shorty yelled. "We need a medic, we need." "Tourniquet," Eli's voice came sudden and commanding from the radio room. The quiet Minnesota kid turned into something else when there was blood. "Shorty, listen to me. Wrap it above the wound, pull it tight, not too close to the knee. Tom, get me morphine from the first aid kit. The plane felt suddenly smaller. His pain filled it even back in the cockpit. I'm coming back, I said, half standing. You're not, Frank said sharply, grabbing my arm. You fly, let them do their jobs. He was right. It still burned to sit there at the controls while my friend bled behind me. We made it back, fast as I could push the engines without tearing them apart. Ellen was waiting when we landed. She and two medics climbed into the plane before the wheels had fully stopped. They carried Pete out on a stretcher. His face was gray under the dried sweat. His leg was wrapped in bandages that were already seeping red. Will he be okay? Shorty asked, his voice small. Ellen looked at him. There were smears of blood on her hands already from taking off the bandages to look. We'll do everything we can, she said. You got the tourniquet on in time, that's good work. Her eyes met mine over the stretcher for a second. You got him back fast, she said quietly. That helps. I watched them load Pete into the ambulance. As it drove away, kicking up mud, I felt something tighten in my chest that never really loosened again. Pete lived. They took his leg. He came back to the barracks on crutches weeks later to say goodbye before they shipped him home. We stood around him in an awkward circle. Guess I'm half a man now, he tried to joke. Bull, Joe said, his eyes bright. You're twice the man most of us are. After he was gone, his empty bunk sat there like a missing tooth. His replacement was a kid named Charlie. He smiled too much and had hands that shook when he lit a cigarette. We taught him how to load the 50 cows, how to clear a jam, how to strap on his parachute so it wouldn't tangle if he had to jump. We didn't say it, but we all thought the same thing. Maybe if we taught him right, if we flew right, if we just did everything right, we wouldn't lose another. War doesn't care how right you are. But by our 10th mission, the base already felt older. The paint on some planes was scorched. Some tails carried more bomb symbols now, little yellow shapes under the cockpit window marking missions flown. Other tails never moved again, pushed to the far edge of the field, waiting to be stripped for parts. There were more faces in the mess hall I didn't know. New crews replacing those who were gone. The laughter when it came was quicker now, a little desperate. In the evenings when we weren't flying the next day, we went to the little bar just off base. The beer was warm. The floor was sticky. There was a piano that was almost in tune. Men crowded the room, talking loudly about anything except what they were really thinking. Sometimes there were dances in a nearby town. A bus would take us. The British girls wore dresses that had been mended twice and still smiled with their whole faces. For a few hours, you could pretend this was all just some big, stupid misunderstanding that would be over soon. One night after a bad mission where another crew we knew didn't come back, I found myself outside the bar alone. The night was damp, fog curling low over the ground. My breath came in little white puffs. I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. Should I say I told you so? Ellen's voice said. I turned. She wore a dark coat, her hair up, her face pale in the weak light. About what? I asked. About not getting attached, she said. First day I met you, I told myself, don't learn their names, don't learn their jokes. Don't learn who likes sugar in their coffee or who always hums in the hallway. Just treat the wounds and move on. Her eyes were very tired. How's that working out? I asked. She laughed once without much humor. Terribly, she said. We stood there a moment, in the soft sound of distant engines and voices. How many have you lost? I asked quietly. She looked at me a long time before answering. Too many, she said, but not as many as I would have without you bringing them back as fast as you do. We were silent again, the fog wrapped around us like a cold blanket. Do you ever feel guilty? I asked. She looked surprised. About what? Dropping bombs on places where people live, I said. Once the words were out, I couldn't pull them back. I mean, I know they're targets, factories, railroads, but there are houses near there, streets, kids. We're up there, we drop, we turn, we don't see the ground, but I think about it after. Sometimes I see things, in my head, people running, fire. She didn't answer right away. Her breath clouded the air. You want the honest answer? She said. That would be nice, I said. Sometimes, she said. Sometimes I feel sick at the thought. Other times when I'm picking shrapnel out of a 19-year-old's chest, I feel like I'd drop a bomb on the devil himself if it would make this stop. Her hands were in her coat pockets. I could see the white of her knuckles. I don't know where the line is, she said softly. I just know this. If you short your run, if you miss your target because you let yourself be soft, some boy on the ground is going to have to fight longer. Maybe he dies instead. I can't carry that on top of everything else. She looked at me, and in her eyes there was something like pleading. You know what keeps me sane, she said. I don't think about the bombs, I think about the bandages, the ones I actually get to wrap, the wounds I actually get to close. If I think bigger than that, she shook her head. I can't. I nodded slowly. There was a knot in my chest that wouldn't untangle.
I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't sure for what. Don't be, she said. Just fly well, come back, that's enough. I wanted to say something else, something that would cut through the fog and the fear and the noise. Instead, we just stood there breathing cold air together for a few more minutes. Two small, tired people in a big gray war. By the time we hit 20 missions, we'd seen too much and not enough. We'd seen planes explode in midair, a white flash and then nothing. We'd seen parachutes open, tiny white flowers against dark clouds. We'd seen men come back with 1,000-yard stares that didn't go away, even when they laughed. We also seen our own strength. There was the mission to Bremen, when number 2 engine caught fire halfway to the target. Flames licked out from under the cowling, orange and angry. The engine gauge needles swung wildly. Cutting number 2, Tom shouted. Fire in the nacelle. Before I could answer, Joe's voice came, fierce and sharp. Danny, if you peel off now, we're toast. Fighters will eat us alive. Stay in the box, amigo, stay. He was right. A wounded bomber alone was a dead bomber. Hold it, I said through gritted teeth. Tom, get that fire out. Dump fuel if you have to. For a few long seconds, I felt the heat through the cockpit floor. I smelled burning oil. I imagined the wing just going. Then the flames sputtered, died. Smoke curled away into the slipstream. Fire out, Tom panted. Engine gone, though. We're on 3. 3's enough, I said, my voice shook. We stay, we drop, we go home. Later, back on the ground, someone told me that other pilots had talked about Sky Lantern that day. Crazy Miller, flying 3-engine in the middle of the group. It didn't feel like bravery. It felt like the only choice that didn't kill us faster. Our courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just putting one foot in front of the other, climbing back into that cold metal tube when every part of you wanted to run. Sometimes it was smaller things. It was Eli, the quiet radio man, sitting with Charlie, the new waist gunner, the night before his first mission, walking him through what the flak sounded like. What to do if his gun jammed 3 times in a row until Charlie's breathing slowed. It was Frank, slipping an extra chocolate bar into Joe's flight jacket pocket before a long mission, because Joe's mother had mentioned in a letter that he looked thin in the photo he'd sent. It was Ellen, holding a dying boy's hand in the hospital tent, and telling him with a steady voice and a lie she wished were true, that his brother had made it out of the crash too. None of that made the war good. It just made us human in the middle of it. When we got the order for our 25th mission, there was a strange feeling in the air. 25 was the magic number then. Complete 25 missions and you were done. You rotated home. No more flak. No more fighters. No more waking up at 3 a.m. to stare at a curtain hiding a red string that might mean your death. Just one more, Frank said, his voice half prayer, half disbelief. Just one more and then we're out of here. Don't say it like that, Shorty snapped. You'll jinx us. You don't believe in jinxes, Joe said. Today I do, Shorty answered. The briefing hut was even quieter than usual that morning. Men shifted in their seats. The air smelled of coffee and sweat and something else, anticipation's bitter cousin. The operations officer pulled the curtain away. The red string stretched farther than any we'd seen. Today, gentlemen, he said, you're going to Berlin. There was a silence that wasn't exactly shocked. We'd all known it would come someday, but it was heavy. Berlin, the heart of it all, the center. We will be hitting industrial targets, the officer went on. Factories, rail yards, we expect heavy resistance, but this one matters. You cut their heart, the body gets weaker. You make history today. History, the word sat wrong in my stomach. Afterwards, outside, the air was colder than it had any right to be. Frost sparkled on the wing of Sky Lantern. I touched the metal with my glove, feeling the thin skin of aluminum that separated us from nothing. "You don't have to fly this," Ellen said. She stood by the wheel, her coat buttoned up to her throat. She must have come straight from the hospital. There was a faint, rusty smudge on her cuff. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You've already flown 24, she said. "You've done more than enough. The colonel said so. They can find some fresh crew to take this one, boys who don't know better yet." I looked down at the tarmac, at the faint, dark stain where oil had dripped under another plane. "Joe still needs one more to finish his tour," I said. "Tom, too, and Shorty, and you think they'll let you sit this out while your crew goes up without you," she said. "Do you think they'd want that?" I pictured Sky Lantern taking off with someone else in my seat. My hands clenched. "No," I said, "they wouldn't." "There you go," she said. She stepped closer. For a second, we were almost touching. "One of these days," she said, "this is going to be over. You're going to be back in Iowa yelling at some kid to get off your lawn." "Do I look like the yelling type?" I asked, trying to smile. Her eyes were bright in the cold. "You look like the type who will live long enough to turn into his father," she said. A small edge of kindness turned the words soft. "Come back, Danny. Don't be a hero. Just come back." My father's words floated up in my memory. Heroes are for newspapers. "I'll try," I said. It never felt like enough, but it was all I had. She reached out and very quickly, like she was afraid of her own hand, touched my arm. "Good luck," she said. Then she turned and walked away. I watched her go until she disappeared into the mist. Then I climbed the ladder into my plane, into the cold, into the noise, into the place where I'd already almost died more times than I could count. Which brings us back to the sky over Berlin. So there we were, bomb bay doors open. One engine gone, flak blooming around us like dark flowers. "Bombs away," Mark shouted in my ears. "Bombs away." "Doors closing," Walt said. A flak burst went off under our right wing. The plane lurched violently. My teeth snapped together so hard I tasted blood. Warning lights blinked. Number 4 engine stuttered, coughed. "We're hit," Tom yelled. "Right wing took a big one. Number 4's running rough, I'm feathering." The vibration changed. A new, ugly shudder through the frame. We were down to 2 engines on the right wing, one struggling on the left. That's not a combination you want at 15,000 feet over the enemy's capital. "Hold formation," came the lead pilot's voice over the radio, sharp and hard. "Hold, we go home together." I looked out, saw the other ships around us, some smoking, some trailing pieces. We were all bleeding, one way or another. "Danny," Frank said quietly, so only I heard. "We can't hold this much longer. We're losing altitude." He was right. The altimeter was unwinding, slow but steady. "Mark," I said, "what happens if we drop out now? How far to the nearest friendly ground?" "Too far," he said without hesitation. "We jump here, we're all in the bag. Prisons if we're lucky, bullets if we're not." Eli cut in. "Radio says some P-51s are waiting to pick us up on egress," he said. "Fighter cover maybe 10 minutes out if we can stay with the group." I looked again at the planes around us. At the city below, smoke rising in thick columns. At the horizon, a thin line of hope where the dark haze of Germany met the gray of the sky. "Okay," I said, "we stay." The next 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. Flak kept following us, though less intense as we moved away from the hardened center. My hands ached from holding the wheel. Every new shudder of the fuselage made my heart jump. "Tail to pilot," Joe said at one point. His voice was strained. I got one. No, two bandits circling back there, Fock wolves. They're waiting for us to fall out. I can see it. Keep your eye on them, I said. Call out if they move in. We limped on. Then finally, a different voice crackled in my headphones. Hi, with a southern drawl and a kind of lazy confidence that felt like sunshine after a month of rain. Sky Lantern, this is Mustang Blue 3. Y'all look like you could use some company. I craned my neck and saw them, sleek single-engine fighters, silver with bright yellow noses. P-51s. They swooped in like hawks, looping around us and the rest of the formation. The German fighters behind us hesitated, then peeled away. No one wanted to mix it up with Mustangs unless they had to. I almost laughed with relief. Mustang Blue 3, this is Sky Lantern, I said. I think I love you. The fighter pilot chuckled. Sorry, son, I'm taken, he said. Just keep that crate in the air and we'll see you to the water. The sky got a little bit bigger then. But our troubles weren't over. Crossing back over the gray land, our wounded engines struggled. The left wing dragged. I had to keep constant pressure on the wheel to keep us level. Fuel gauges dipped toward the red much faster than they should have. Tom, I said, give me the truth. How much gas we got? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat. Not enough, he said. We got leaks from those flak hits. We'll make the channel maybe, but I don't know about England. Is there a field closer along the coast? Frank asked. There's one, Mark said, rustling charts. Emergency strip near the cliffs, short, but we might. He didn't finish. Pilot, Joe suddenly yelled, voice high, near breaking. I got something back here, Jesus. There was a loud metallic bang. The whole tail section shook. Joe, I shouted, talk to me, Joe. No answer. Cold washed through my body in one fast wave. Somebody check on him, I yelled. Tom, go now. I'm on it, Tom said, already unstrapping. He disappeared down the narrow crawlway. The seconds stretched. Come on, I muttered, staring at the horizon where I could just barely see the faint shine of water. The channel so close. Tom's voice came back, breathless. He's hit. Tail took a big chunk of shrapnel. He's bleeding bad. For a moment I couldn't see. The cockpit blurred. Is he? I couldn't finish. He's alive, Tom said, but we gotta get him down fast. Everything narrowed to one point. My crew, my ship, the strip of land on the far side of that sheet of gray water. Okay, I said. My voice sounded far away in my own ears. Okay, new plan, Mark, give me that emergency strip. Tom, patch what you can, keep pressure on the wound. Eli, call ahead, tell them we're coming in hot with a wounded man. Frank. Yeah, Frank said. Stay with me, I said, all the way down. He nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. Yes, sir, he said. We crossed the channel low, so low I could see white foam where waves hit rocks. One engine coughed again, a sick, rattling sound. The emergency field appeared ahead, a thin, pale line carved out of green, ending in a row of trees. It's short, Mark said unnecessarily. I can see that, I muttered. Gear down. Frank reached for the lever. There was a grinding noise, then a horrible screech. Come on, I whispered. Left main's down, Tom reported, still in the back, his voice muffled. Right main is stuck halfway, tail wheels down. A half-down landing gear was a nightmare. If we tried to land like that, the right wheel might buckle, flipping us. If we left the gear up entirely, we could belly land. Risky, but at least predictable. Retract it, I said. Gear up, we're sliding this one in. You sure? Frank said, eyes wide. No, I said, but it's what we've got. The field rushed up at us. I cut power to the remaining engines, flared the nose up just enough, prayed silently to a god I hadn't spoken to since I was a kid. Hold on, I shouted into the interphone. Brace. The belly of Sky Lantern hit the ground with a scream of tearing metal. The whole plane shuddered, bounced, slammed down again. Sparks flew past the cockpit windows like angry fireflies. The nose plowed up dirt. A wingtip clipped a fence post and tore it out of the ground. For a long second, we were neither flying nor truly on the ground, just sliding on a cushion of dust, noise, and terror. Then we stopped. Silence hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, breath coming in gasps, hands frozen on the controls. My shoulders ached from the strain. "Everyone sound off," I managed. "Co-pilot here," Frank said. "Navigator alive," Mark said, voice shaking. "Bombardier O," Walt groaned. "But yeah." "Radio good," Eli said. "We waste gunners, we're in one piece," Shorty said, followed by Charlie's present. "Engineer," Tom's voice came ragged. "I'm okay, Joe's, he's still with us, but we gotta move." Through the cracked cockpit glass, I saw trucks and ambulances racing across the field toward us. "Everyone out," I shouted, fumbling with my straps. "Move, move, get Joe first." We scrambled down the ladder, dropped onto the torn earth. The smell of burned oil, hot metal, and fresh dirt hit me all at once. The ground crew from the emergency strip reached us, medics jumping down from trucks with stretchers. "In the tail," Tom shouted, waving them back. "He's back there." They ran. I turned and looked at Sky Lantern. She lay there like a wounded animal, belly torn open, skin scraped and oil streaked. One propeller blade was twisted like a broken arm. Smoke trickled from somewhere under the wing. "Fire," someone yelled. A thin flame licked out from under the fuselage, orange and hungry. "Get back," a ground crew sergeant shouted. "She's gonna go." He was right, there was still fuel in those tanks, still ammunition in those guns, if the fire reached any of it. "Joe's still inside," Tom shouted. He was right too. Before I really thought about it, I was running back toward the tail. "Lieutenant, you idiot," Frank yelled behind me. The heat hit me before I reached the fuselage. It curled my hair, burned my cheeks. Smoke clawed at my throat. Inside, the plane was a maze of shadows and flickering orange. The metal floor was hot under my boots. I ducked under a hanging cable, shoved past a dangling oxygen bottle. "Joe," I shouted, coughing. "Joe, where are you?" "Back here." His voice was weak, almost lost under the crackle of fire and the ping of cooling metal. I crawled, the air thick and black. My eyes watered.
I found him in the tail section, slumped in his seat, one hand still wrapped around the grips of his gun. Blood had soaked through his flight suit, dark and sticky. His face was pale and slick with sweat. His eyes tried to focus on me. "You always gotta be the hero, huh?" he whispered. "You shut up and help me," I said hoarsely. I fumbled with his straps, my fingers slipping. The plane shook as something deep inside it gave a warning groan. I got the last buckle loose. He slumped forward into my arms, heavier than he had any right to be. "Come on," I said, "we're going home." I half carried, half dragged him down the narrow passage. My lungs burned. The skin on the back of my neck prickled with the heat behind me. We stumbled out the waste door and into blinding daylight. Hands grabbed us. Medics, ground crew, they took Joe's weight, eased him onto a stretcher. I stood there, bent over, hands on my knees, sucking in air that felt both too thin and too thick. Behind us, someone shouted, "Get back, get away from her." They pulled me backward. A second later, Sky Lantern went up. It wasn't a huge Hollywood explosion. It was a hard, angry whoomp, a blast of heat and light that knocked me off my feet. A fireball burst from the center of the fuselage, licking up into the sky. Bits of metal rained down on the field, pinging off trucks, hissing in the wet grass. When I could see again, I lay on my back, chest heaving. The sky above was shockingly blue. Someone knelt over me, a silhouette against the light. "Danny," a familiar voice said, "can you hear me?" I blinked. Ellen's face swam into focus. She must have come with the ambulance from our base. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. There was soot on her cheek. "You again?" I rasped. "Yeah, me again," she said. "You really don't listen, do you?" I tried to smile. It hurt. "How's Joe?" I asked. She hesitated only a fraction of a second. "He's alive," she said. "You gave us a fighting chance by dragging him out when you did." I closed my eyes, relief washed over me like a tide. Then the world went dark. What? I woke up in a hospital bed. White sheets, white ceiling, the faint sharp smell of antiseptic, the distant beep and hum of machines. Somewhere someone murmured in pain. My body felt like it was made of lead and cotton at the same time. Every breath hurt, but in a dull, manageable way. I turned my head. On the small bedside table, my father's silver dollar sat in a neat circle of light from the window. "I found it in your jacket," Ellen's voice said. She sat in a chair next to the bed, dark smudges under her eyes. Her hair was down around her shoulders. I'd never seen it like that. She looked tired, and more beautiful for it somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with pretty and everything to do with real. "Did I make it to 25? I asked. My voice was rough like I'd swallowed sand. She smiled, a small, astonished thing, like she hadn't expected me to say that. "Yes," she said, "you did." "What about the others?" "Frank's got a sprained wrist and a heroic story," she said. "Mark's fine. Walt's bragging about how he kept his bomb sight from cracking. Eli's writing it all down already. Tom's trying to convince the ground crew that they can patch Sky Lantern back together, which they can't because she's scrapped now. Shorty and Charlie have bruises in places they didn't know they had." "And Joe?" I asked. Her eyes softened. "He lost a lot of blood," she said. "Shrapnel tore up his leg badly. We had to take it off above the knee." She paused. "But he's alive. He woke up once. First thing he asked was if you were okay. Then he told me to tell you he still owes you $10. I laughed. It came out more like a cough, but it was laughter. "Tell them I'm adding interest," I said. We sat there a moment, the light shifting across the floor. "Do you remember," she said slowly, "what you told your sister when you left home?" My mind drifted back. The kitchen, the radio, my father's hands, Ruth's face. "I told her I'd try to come back," I said. "Well," Ellen said, "you did." We were quiet again. There were things hanging in the air between us that neither of us quite knew how to touch. Death and almost death. The way her hand had felt on my arm that morning. The way I had run into a burning plane without thinking. "You were brave," she said finally. I looked at the ceiling. "I was scared out of my mind," I said. "That's what I mean," she said. "Bravery isn't not being afraid, it's being afraid and doing the thing anyway." I thought of my father, cigarette smoke in the kitchen light. "Fear is what you feel," I murmured. "Cowardice is what you choose." "What?" she asked. "Something my father said," I told her. She nodded slowly. "Well," she said, "you chose well." The war didn't end that day. Or the next. There were more missions, more boys sent up into the gray, more names written on boards and telegrams delivered to porches far away. But not for us. A month later, after my ribs stopped hurting every time I laughed, and Joe had learned to move a little on his crutches, they sent us home. We stood at the edge of the runway the day we left, a group of men who had been boys not that long ago. The air smelled of spring rain. The sky was, for once, a clean, hopeful blue. We hugged, clapped shoulders, promised to write. Some of us did, some of us didn't. Life has a way of pulling you in 10 directions at once when the guns go quiet. Eli went back to Minnesota, and last I heard, ran a hardware store. Tom married a girl from the town near the base and stayed in England fixing tractors instead of engines. Shorty became a mechanic in Philadelphia. Charlie worked union jobs and drank too much for a while before settling down. Frank went back to Boston then, years later, showed up on my porch in Iowa with a suitcase and a grin, saying he couldn't stand the city noise anymore. We sat on that porch and drank coffee and didn't talk about certain things for a long time. Joe went home to San Antonio. He joked about his missing leg, called his prosthetic my good luck charm. He opened a small garage with money the VA helped him get. He worked on cars with the same care he'd given machine guns. As for me, I married a nurse. Her name was Ellen Walker. She moved to Iowa without complaining about the corn or the quiet. Sometimes, late at night when the wind blew just right, we both woke up at the same time, eyes wide, hearts racing. On those nights, we held each other's hands in the dark and waited for the echoes of flak to fade. The war became stories. Stories we told our kids in pieces, never all at once. Stories they learned in school with dates and maps and arrows that they later came back to us with, saying, "Dad, were you really there?" Yes, we were. Which brings me back, all these years later, to that sky above Berlin. When I close my eyes now, sitting on my porch with the field stretched out in front of me, I can still see it. The way the light caught the top of the clouds, the way the flak bursts hung in the air for a heartbeat, dark circles against the blue, the way the engine's roar vibrated up through my bones. I can still hear Joe's voice in my headset, shaky and joking. I can still feel the weight of him in my arms as we stumbled out of that burning plane. I can still taste the fear. But I also remember something else. I remember the hand of my co-pilot on the controls next to mine, steady as a rock when everything wanted to tear us apart. I remember the calm in my navigator's voice when he gave me a heading, even though he knew the odds. I remember a quiet radio operator taking charge when someone was bleeding. I remember a nurse, laundry soap and antiseptic on her hands, telling a boy a gentle lie so he wouldn't die alone and afraid. People sometimes ask me what war is like. They want the big words, glory, honor, valor. War to me is this, a long stretch of cold, of fear, of noise and smoke and loss. And in the middle of it, 1,000 small choices not to let go of each other. That day over Berlin, I thought I would die. I didn't. Not because I was special or smarter or tougher or braver than anyone else out there. I lived because 10 of us in one thin-skinned plane, and a woman on the ground with a steady pair of hands, and a father's old silver dollar in my pocket, and a bunch of strangers in silver fighters in the sky, all did what they could as well as they could under the worst conditions anyone could imagine. Fear we had in plenty, cowardice now that we tried our damnedest to leave behind. And if there is anything worth remembering, worth telling, worth listening to, all these years later, it's not the noise of the bombs or the size of the explosions. It's the sound of a voice on the interphone saying, "I'm here." It's the feel of someone's hand on your shoulder when the sky is falling. It's the choice made again and again in 100 tiny ways to keep flying toward home.